My father's hand, thick and calloused from years of shaking hands on deals he didn't earn, slammed my head against the ornate, hand-plastered wall of the Venetian ballroom. The impact was dull, a heavy thud that seemed to suck the air out of the room. A collective gasp rippled through the 200 guests, a sea of silk, diamonds, and tailored suits. My sister, the bride, let out a small, strangled cry, her face a mask of frozen horror. Her new husband, a man whose family my father had been courting for a decade, stood beside her, his expression unreadable. For a split second, the only sound was the faint clinking of ice in glasses and the gentle hum of the industrial-grade climate control system I had personally designed and overseen the installation of. A system that was currently keeping 200 of the city's most influential people from melting in the sweltering July heat. My father, his face a blotchy, furious red, his tuxedo jacket straining at the seams, loomed over me. He smelled of expensive whiskey and entitlement. "You arrogant little prick," he seethed, his voice a low, guttural growl that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You think you can embarrass me? In front of my friends, my partners?" He gestured vaguely at the stunned crowd, his hand trembling with rage. "You think you're untouchable?" I didn't answer, I didn't move. I simply stared back at him, my vision swimming slightly. A thin trickle of warmth ran down the back of my neck. I could feel the eyes of every person in that room on me, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and a healthy dose of fear. They weren't afraid for me, they were afraid of him. Of the raw, unchecked power he wielded, the power he believed was absolute. He took my silence as defiance. Of course he did. He'd always seen my quiet nature as a weakness, a flaw to be corrected. He was a man of grand gestures, of loud pronouncements and public displays of dominance. I was a creature of the shadows, of schematics and server racks, of the invisible infrastructure that made his world run. "You're done," he snarled, his face inches from mine. "You're out. I don't care that you're my son. I don't care about the work you do. You're a glorified handyman and I'm done with you." He straightened up, puffing out his chest as if he'd just won a prize fight. He turned to the crowd, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across his lips. "The show," he announced, his voice booming through the silent ballroom, "will go on." And just like that, the spell was broken. The string quartet, after a moment of hesitation, began to play again. The chatter started up, hesitant at first, then louder, more forced. People studiously avoided looking at me as I slowly, deliberately, pushed myself off the wall. My sister rushed towards me, her eyes filled with tears, but her new husband caught her arm, whispering something in her ear. She stopped, her face a battleground of conflicting emotions. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "Not now." I walked out of that ballroom with as much dignity as I could muster, the back of my head throbbing with each step. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what they were all thinking. That I was a broken, humiliated man, cast out by his own father. They were wrong. As I walked through the gilded lobby, past the fountains and the statues and the portraits of long-dead aristocrats, a single thought echoed in my mind, a quiet, cold counterpoint to the symphony of my father's rage. He hadn't fired me, he couldn't. "You can't fire the man who owns the building." The security guard at the main entrance, a man named Frank who I'd shared a coffee with every morning for the past 3 years, averted his eyes as I approached. "Mr. Alden," he mumbled, his hand hovering over the button to open the door. "It's fine, Frank," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I can get it." I pulled out my own keycard, the one with the master access code, the one that could open every door in this entire, sprawling complex. I swiped it, and the heavy glass door slid open with a whisper. As I stepped out into the humid night air, I paused and turned back to him. "Frank," I said, "do me a favor, log the incident, time, date, location, and make sure the CCTV footage from the ballroom is backed up to the off-site server, the one no one else has access to." Frank's eyes widened. He knew what that meant. He knew that I wasn't just a glorified handyman. He knew that I was the one who had built the entire digital nervous system of this place, from the security cameras to the climate control to the high-speed fiber optic network that connected every single office, every single terminal to the outside world. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the storm that was about to break. I didn't go home. I went to my real office, the one no one in my family had ever seen. It was a sterile, windowless room in the sub-basement of the building, a place my father would have sneered at. It was my sanctuary, my control room, the heart of my empire. The walls were lined with monitors, each displaying a different aspect of the building's operations. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and freshly brewed coffee. I sat down in my chair, the worn leather creaking in the silence. For a long moment, I just stared at the screens. At the live feed from the ballroom, where the party was in full swing, my father holding court, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. At the schematics of the building's HVAC system. At the network traffic monitors, the little green lines dancing across the screen, representing the flow of data, the lifeblood of every business in this building. And then, with a deep steadying breath, I began to work. My father, in his infinite arrogance, had never bothered to understand the intricacies of the contract between his company and mine. He saw me as family, and he assumed that meant he could treat me however he wanted. He'd never read the fine print. He'd never understood that our relationship was not one of employer and employee, but of service provider and client, a client who had just very publicly, and very violently, terminated our agreement. So I did what any professional would do in that situation. I began the process of rolling back uncontracted amenities. First, I accessed the building's access control system. With a few keystrokes, I downgraded the access level of every employee of my father's company. Their keycards would still open the main doors, but the executive elevator, the one that went directly to the penthouse seats where my father and his top lieutenants had their offices, would no longer recognize them. They would have to use the main elevators, the ones that stopped at every floor, the ones used by the rank and file. A small, petty annoyance, but a start. Next, I turned my attention to the freight elevators. My father's company was in the process of a major office renovation, and they were constantly moving furniture, equipment, and materials in and out of the building. The freight elevators were essential to that process. With another few lines of code, I revoked their access. They would now have to book the freight elevators like any other tenant, and the waiting list was 3 weeks long. Then, I went for the big one. The one that would cause the most chaos, the most disruption. The one that would make my father's life a living hell. I went for the network. My father's company, a high-frequency trading firm, relied on a dedicated, high-speed fiber optic network that I had personally designed and installed. It was their lifeline to the markets, the source of their immense wealth. The contract for that network, the one my father had never bothered to read, stipulated that it was a premium service, an add-on to the standard building-wide network. A service that was now, thanks to his actions, uncontracted. With a heavy heart but a steady hand, I began the process of decommissioning their dedicated network. I rerouted their traffic to the standard, shared network, the one used by every other tenant in the building. The one that was currently being used by 200 wedding guests, all streaming videos, uploading photos, and generally clogging up the bandwidth. The effect was instantaneous. On one of my monitors, I watched as the latency on my father's network skyrocketed. The little green lines on the traffic monitor turned a sickly, angry red. The high-frequency trading algorithms, the ones that made millions of dollars in a matter of seconds, began to fail. The orders weren't going through. The trades were timing out. The money was stopping. I leaned back in my chair, a grim satisfaction settling over me. The revenge had begun, and I hadn't laid a finger on a single piece of equipment. I hadn't broken a single law. I had simply and professionally adhered to the terms of our now terminated agreement. The next morning, the chaos began in earnest. My phone started ringing off the hook, but I didn't answer. It was my father, his number flashing on the screen like a beacon of his impotent fury. Then came the emails, a torrent of panicked, increasingly desperate messages from his CTO, his head of trading. Network down, they screamed. Catastrophic failure. We're losing millions a minute. I ignored them all. I was busy. I was on the phone with the CEO of my father's biggest competitor, a man named Marcus Thorne. I had known Marcus for years, a rival I respected, a man who understood the value of a well-run system. Marcus, I said, my voice calm and professional, I have a unique opportunity for you. A dedicated high-speed fiber optic network has just become available in the Alden Tower. Premium bandwidth, zero latency. The kind of thing that could give you a serious edge in the market. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The Alden Tower. Marcus said, his voice laced with suspicion. That's your father's building, and his network. It's my building, Marcus. I corrected him gently. And it's my network. The previous tenant has vacated the premises, so to speak. The network is dark, and it's yours if you want it. I could hear the gears turning in his head. He knew what this meant. He knew the kind of advantage this would give him. He also knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm listening, he said. We spent the next hour hashing out the details of the contract. It was a lucrative deal, far more so than the one I had with my father. Marcus understood the value of what I was offering, and he was willing to pay for it. By the time we were done, I had a signed, legally binding contract in my inbox, and Marcus Thorne's company was the new, exclusive tenant of the fastest, most reliable network in the city. The final confrontation came 2 days later. I was summoned to a meeting in the main conference room of my father's company. The air in the room was thick with tension. My father was there, of course, looking haggard and defeated. His face was pale, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he had aged 10 years in the past 48 hours. His QO, a man I had always liked and respected, looked at me with a mixture of awe and terror. And next to my father, at the head of the table, was a man I had never seen before. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored Savile Row suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes as cold and hard as a winter sky. This, I realized, was my father's boss. The chairman of the board, the real power in the company, Mr. Alden. The chairman said, his voice a low, dangerous purr, "I believe you have something that belongs to us." I met his gaze without flinching. "On the contrary," I said, my voice calm and even. "I believe you have been using something that belongs to me, without a contract, and without payment." I then proceeded to lay out, in excruciating detail, the events of the past 2 days. I explained the terms of our original contract, the one my father had so carelessly broken. I explained the steps I had taken to decommission their network, the legality of my actions, and the new, legally binding contract I had signed with Marcus Thorne. I showed them the video footage from the wedding, the footage of my father slamming my head against the wall, the footage that had, as of that morning, gone viral, with over 5 million views. When I was finished, there was a long, heavy silence in the room. My father stared at me, his mouth agape, his face a mask of disbelief. The chairman, however, looked at me with a newfound respect. He was a man who understood power, and he recognized it in me. "So," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "what do you want?" "I want you out of my building," I said simply. "Your lease is terminated, effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." My father started to protest, to bluster, to threaten, but the chairman silenced him with a single, sharp gesture. "And what about the network?" he asked. "Is there any way we can get it back?" I shook my head. "The network is no longer available," I said. "It has been leased to another client. Exclusively." The chairman nodded slowly. He knew when he was beaten. He knew that I held all the cards. "Very well," he said. "We will be out in 30 days. He stood up, and the meeting was over. The fallout was swift and brutal. My father's company was forced to relocate to a less prestigious, less technologically advanced building. The move was a logistical nightmare, and they lost millions of dollars in the process. My father, the once powerful titan of industry, was unceremoniously demoted, reassigned to a backwater office in a forgotten corner of the company, a place they called corporate Siberia. He was a broken man, his career in ruins, his reputation shattered. Marcus Thorne's company, on the other hand, thrived. With their new state-of-the-art network, they dominated the market, their profits soaring to unprecedented heights. A few weeks after they moved in, Marcus invited me to his new office, the one that had once been my father's. It was a corner office with a panoramic view of the city, the kind of office my father had always coveted. "I have to hand it to you, kid," Marcus said, a genuine smile on his face. "You played this perfectly. You're a master of the game." "It wasn't a game," I said. "It was business?" He nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "Well," he said, "I'm glad we're on the same side." He handed me a glass of champagne. "To a long and profitable partnership." We clinked glasses, the sound echoing in the spacious office. As I looked out at the city lights twinkling below, I thought about my father, alone in his corporate Siberia, and I felt a strange sense of peace. I hadn't wanted to destroy him. I had just wanted him to understand. To understand that power isn't about shouting and hitting and making a scene. It's about quiet competence. It's about knowing where the real power comes from. And as I stood there, sipping my champagne, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was the one who held the power now. The quiet moves, I thought to myself, always beat the loud egos. Always. Thanks for listening. See you next time.